In the summer of 1867, in a remote farming community outside Sedalia, Missouri, 8-year-old Timothy Caldwell became the subject of the most disturbing medical case study ever documented in the American Midwest. Dr. Samuel Harding, the region's only physician, filled 3 leather-bound journals with observations of a child whose behavior defied every principle of human nature known to 19th century medicine. But before we dive deeper into this dark chapter of history, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss. Some houses are not built of stone and wood, but of secrets and sorrow. They hold the echoes of every life lived within their walls, every whisper, every tear, every dying breath. Blackwood Manor was such a house. It clung to the edge of the Massachusetts coast like a vulture, a place of immense wealth and even greater mystery. For 50 years it had been the domain of the Blackwood family, a dynasty built on shipping fortunes and ruthless ambition. But now, only one Blackwood remained, and she was about to make an offer that was a part miracle, part death sentence. Her name was Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood. She was the last of her line, a widow of immense, almost obscene wealth, and a woman who had become as much a legend as the house she haunted. In her youth, she had been a celebrated beauty. Now, in her late 70s, she was a creature of rumor and shadow. The local townspeople spoke of her in whispers, telling stories of her eccentricities, her reclusiveness, and the series of tragic, unfortunate accidents that had claimed every single one of her heirs. A husband lost at sea, a son to a hunting accident, a daughter to a sudden virulent fever. She was the sole inheritor of a fortune, and, some whispered, a curse. And for the past 2 years, the only person to see the inside of Blackwood Manor, the only person to witness the slow, strange decay of its mistress, was her maid. Clara was hardworking, efficient, and invisible. Everything a good maid was supposed to be. She had come to Blackwood Manor out of pure desperation, fleeing a life of poverty in a crowded city slum for the promise of a steady wage. Her dream was simple and achingly out of reach: to save enough money to buy a small cottage for herself and her ailing younger sister, a place far away from the filth and disease that had claimed her parents. But the pittance Mrs. Blackwood paid her would barely be enough in a lifetime. Clara was trapped, her hopes slowly dying in the grand, silent halls of the old mansion. Her duties were strange. She was not to clean the dust-sheeted rooms. She was not to touch the family portraits. Her work was confined to Mrs. Blackwood's private chambers, a small suite of rooms at the top of the house. It was there, one stormy October evening, with the wind screaming outside like a banshee and the waves crashing against the cliffs below, that Mrs. Blackwood made her impossible proposition. She had dismissed Clara for the night, but then called her back. The old woman's voice, usually a dry, rasping whisper, was different tonight. It was cold, clear, and held the chilling weight of absolute finality. "Clara, you have served me well. You are quiet. You do not ask questions. You have seen the ghosts of this house and pretended they are merely drafts in the hallway. I appreciate that. I am dying, child. My doctors give me a month. My lawyers give me paperwork. But I have no one to leave this fortune to, no one to carry the Blackwood name. or perhaps no one worthy of its burden. There are rules. You must not leave the house for any reason. You must not open the doors or windows to anyone or anything. You must not seek help. The telephone line will be cut. You will be utterly alone. Stay here until dawn. No matter what you see, no matter what you hear, do not leave this house. Survive, and everything I own will be yours. The offer hung in the air, a monstrous, beautiful thing. It was insane. It was a trap. It had to be. Yet the money, a cottage for her sister, a life free from fear and poverty. Clara thought of the subtle, unsettling things she had witnessed in this house. The way doors would sometimes creak open in sealed-off wings of the mansion. The faint sound of a child's laughter she had once heard echoing from the empty nursery. The cold spots in the grand hallway, so frigid they would raise the hairs on her arms. The unnerving portrait of the old woman's husband, whose eyes seemed to follow her with a cold, malevolent intelligence. The house was not empty. She knew it. Mrs. Blackwood gestured with a skeletal, long-fingered hand towards a heavy mahogany box on the table beside her. She opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were stacks of stock certificates, deeds to properties across the country, and jewelry that glittered in the firelight like a pirate's treasure. It was a fortune beyond Clara's wildest imaginings. I have no love for my distant, grasping relatives. They are vultures waiting for me to die. I would rather see this house and everything in it turn to ash than let them have it. So I have decided to make a different sort of wager. A final piece of Blackwood theater. She turns her piercing gaze on Clara. Her eyes seem to bore right through her. I will leave it all to you, Clara. The house, the fortune, the stocks, the jewels, everything. A life you cannot even dream of. But my family's legacy is not a gift to be given lightly. It must be earned. It must be survived. A cold knot of dread and electrifying hope tightened in Clara's stomach. She could barely breathe. What was the old woman saying? The terms are simple. I will be leaving tonight to stay with my physician in the city. I will return at dawn. You will remain here, alone. You must survive one night, from midnight until the first light of dawn within these walls. She leaned forward, her dark eyes glittering with a strange, manic energy. This wasn't a wager. It was a test, a trial. Mrs. Blackwood was not asking her to stay in an empty house. She was asking her to spend a night with its ghosts. Clara looked from the glittering fortune in the box to the old woman's predatory, expectant face. Every rational instinct screamed at her to run, to flee this house and never look back. But the image of her sister's pale, coughing face, the memory of her parents' desperate, poverty-stricken final days, it was a more powerful ghost than any that might lurk in these halls. I accept. A thin, reptilian smile spread across Mrs. Blackwood's lips. She stood, her movements surprisingly brisk for a dying woman, and retrieved a large, ornate iron key from a drawer. She pressed it into Clara's hand. This locks the front door from the inside. Lock it behind me, and do not open it for anyone. With a deep breath, Clara turned the key in the lock. The sound of the heavy bolt sliding into place was deafeningly final. She was locked in, alone. As the last chime of midnight faded into the oppressive silence, a new sound began. A faint scratching noise coming from deep within the walls of the house, and from one of the shadowy corners of the grand staircase, she thought she heard it again, the soft, ghostly whisper of a child's laughter. The night had just begun. In the anatomy of fear, the first incision is always silence. After the front door was bolted, an oppressive, watchful quiet descended upon Blackwood Manor. It was a silence that felt heavy, ancient, and alive. Clara stood in the vast, dark entrance hall, her heart hammering against her ribs, every nerve ending tingling with the primal awareness of being watched. She told herself it was just an old house. The noises were the wind, the settling of old timbers. But the house was not settling, it was waking up. The first hour was a war of nerves. Lights in the hallways would flicker and die as she approached, plunging her into sudden darkness. The sound of distant footsteps would echo from the floor above her, only to vanish the moment she stopped to listen. A book, left on a table in the library, slid off and crashed to the floor with a sound like a gunshot in the stillness. Each event was small, isolated, and easily dismissed as a trick of the mind or a quirk of an old house. But taken together, they were a prelude, a symphony of terror tuning its instruments before the performance began. Clara, driven by a desperate need to rationalize her fear, tried to convince herself it was all a part of Mrs. Blackwood's game. The old woman was a master of theater after all. Perhaps the house was rigged with tricks to test her resolve. But this comforting thought was shattered when she found the first piece of the house's true, dark history. It was a locket, forgotten and hidden away. Inside, there was no portrait, only a tiny, faded newspaper clipping dated 1883. The headline was small but chilling. Local girl missing. It described a young woman named Mary O'Connell, who had taken a position as a maid at Blackwood Manor and had vanished without a trace. The article noted it was the third such disappearance from the estate in a decade. A cold dread, far deeper than the fear of creaking floorboards, washed over Clara. This wasn't just a test. This was a pattern. She was not the first to be offered a deal by the Blackwoods. She was just the latest. Her rising panic was interrupted by a new sound. It was different from the bumps and creaks. It was the sound of profound sorrow, faint but unmistakable. The sound of a child crying. The sound led her upward, into a wing of the house that Mrs. Blackwood had always forbidden her to enter. The air grew colder with every step, the crying louder, more desperate. It led her to a single closed door at the end of a long, portrait-lined hallway. The nursery. With a trembling hand, she pushed the door open. The room was a time capsule of tragedy. Dust lay thick on everything, a shroud of gray over a life cut short. A beautiful, hand-carved crib stood in the center of the room, its blankets still tucked as if waiting for a child who would never arrive. Broken toys were scattered across the floor, like tiny bodies on a battlefield. And in the corner, a single rocking horse began to sway back and forth, slowly, rhythmically, on its own. The crying had stopped. Suddenly, a child's laughter, sharp and clear, echoed directly behind her. Panic, pure and primal, seized her. She fumbled for the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. It was locked. She was trapped. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the thick, soundproofed walls of the old manor. Her rationalizations were gone. This was not a game. This was not a trick. The house was alive, and it was playing with her. It was in that moment of absolute despair, trapped in the nursery's suffocating darkness, that she found the diary. Her hands, scrambling along the wall in the dark, knocked over a small bedside table. As she felt for its contents on the floor, her fingers brushed against the worn leather of a small bound book. Using a match from a small box she always carried, she struck a light. It was the diary of another maid, a girl named Sarah, whose entry was dated from 15 years prior. The final entry was a scrawl of pure terror. She lied. The old woman lied. There's no fortune. It's not a test. It's a feeding. The house needs a life. It always takes one. She doesn't offer the money as a reward. She offers it as bait. It's not her house. It's... The entry ended there. The ink smudged as if the writer had been violently interrupted. "It's a feeding." The words echoed in the darkness. A horrifying revelation. Clara finally understood. Mrs. Blackwood had not offered her a chance at a new life. She had offered her life itself as a sacrifice to whatever malevolent force resided within these walls. The old woman hadn't lost her family to a series of tragic accidents. She had fed them to the house to preserve her own unnatural existence. As this monstrous truth settled, the temperature in the room plummeted. A frost began to creep across the window panes, forming intricate, fern-like patterns. She could see her own breath, a white plume of vapor in the frigid air. The house was no longer just playing with her. It was preparing its meal. She threw herself against the door, her shoulder colliding with the heavy oak again and again. But it was useless. Escape was not an option. The mansion itself, she realized with a fresh wave of terror, was the trap. It was a living, breathing predator, and she was locked inside its belly. Suddenly, the rocking of the horse began again, faster this time, more violent. Thump, 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 thump. The sound like a frantic, wooden heartbeat in the darkness. And from the crib in the center of the room, a new sound began. Not a cry, but a soft, hungry whisper, speaking a single, chilling word, over and over again. Dramatized voiceover. A child's ghostly, sibilant whisper. "Mother, mother, mother." It was the voice of the Blackwood children, the ones who had died so long ago. But they were not crying for their own mother. They were calling for the new one their house had just been promised. The longest night of a life is not measured in hours, but in heartbeats. For Clara, trapped in the cold, haunted heart of Blackwood Manor, time had become an eternity of fear. The whispers from the crib grew more insistent, the rocking of the horse more violent, as if a spectral tantrum was building. She was not just a prisoner in a room, she was an offering, waiting for the final, terrible moment of consumption. The house was alive around her, its ancient, malevolent energy focusing on this one small, lightless space. She was going to die here, just like Sarah, just like Mary, another forgotten maid fed to the insatiable hunger of the Blackwood legacy. But as the whispers grew into a chorus and the cold became a physical, crushing weight, something inside Clara shifted. The terror did not vanish, but it was joined by something else, a white-hot, desperate rage. Rage at Mrs. Blackwood for her monstrous deception. Rage at the poverty that had driven her to this gilded cage. And rage at this house for trying to claim a life that was not its to take. She would not be a meal. She would not be a ghost.
Dramatized voiceover, as Clara, her voice a raw, defiant scream. "Leave me alone! I am not your mother! You will not have me!" Her scream, an act of pure human defiance against a supernatural force, seemed to momentarily stun the room into silence. The rocking stopped. The whispers ceased. In that brief, blessed quiet, she heard a sound from outside the nursery, the faint, distant chiming of the grandfather clock in the hall. It was striking 5 o'clock. Dawn was coming. The thought of the sun, of light, of an end to this night was a jolt of pure, unadulterated hope. Fueled by a final, desperate surge of strength, she turned her attention back to the door. She attacked the lock with the splintered wood, jamming it, twisting it, her knuckle. She fled through the labyrinthine corridors of the dying house. The portraits on the wall seemed to sneer as she passed, their painted eyes filled with a scornful amusement. The house was not done with her yet. Doors slammed in her path. Unseen hands grabbed at her dress from the shadows. Ghostly whispers mocked her from all sides. It was a final, desperate attempt to hold her, to drag her back into its dark, hungry heart. But Clara did not stop. She was no longer just a maid. She was a survivor, a soldier escaping a battlefield. She burst into the main entrance hall, bloodied, exhausted, her clothes torn, her hair wild, and she stopped dead. The old woman was back, or perhaps she had never left. The story about a visit to her physician had been the final, perfect lie in a night built of them. Dramatized voiceover as Mrs. Blackwood, her voice calm and elegant, a terrifying contrast to the horror Clara has just endured. "You've done well, child. Very well indeed. Most of them don't make it past the nursery. You have a fire in you. I saw it the day you arrived." Narrator. Clara stared at her, her mind struggling to reconcile the calm, elegant old woman with the monstrous truth she had discovered in the diary. She thought of the missing maids, of the family accidents.
The house is old, my dear, and it is hungry. It gave my family wealth and power for generations, but it requires payment, a life every so often to renew its strength, a small price for the Blackwood legacy. My husband, my children, they were not strong enough. They became part of the price. But I am a survivor, just like you. Clara, her rage and exhaustion giving her a desperate courage, took a step forward. "The wager is over," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I survived. The fortune, it is mine." For the first time, Mrs. Blackwood laughed. It was not a sound. The truth was more horrifying than she could have ever imagined. The wager was real. The fortune was hers, but it was not a prize. It was a curse. She had not won her freedom. She had inherited a prison. She was now the mistress of Blackwood Manor, bound to it, required to feed it, to find the next desperate girl, to make the next monstrous offer, all to preserve her own life, just as Eleanor Blackwood had done for 50 years.